Okay, it's about 2 o'clock and we want to respect your time, keep everyone on schedule. So we'll get started. Thank you so much for joining us here in the Office of Educational Effectiveness for another one of our fall workshops in our assessment workshop series. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about why assessment works with some evidence-based examples from the literature. My name is Krista Emma. I'm one of our educational effectiveness specialists. I'm here with my colleague, Diana. She's another one of our specialists on the team. She's always my partner in crime with all of these. So thanks, Diana, for all your help with this. And she's going to talk us through our objectives.
All right, so during our workshop today, we're going to discuss different ways institutions of higher ed can approach assessment. We're going to explain the role that the assessment process plays on improving students' ability to achieve their stated learning objectives. And then we're going to evaluate some select examples from the literature on the benefits of the assessment process. So we're just going to do a quick pulse check. Want you to scan the QR code. We want to know, how do you feel about assessment? And we want you to be as honest as possible. There is no judgment. We are not looking at this to be anything more than just to see where everyone is.
I'll give you a second to scan that QR, and then I'm going to switch windows, but that QR code will pop up again if you still need it. All right, so we've got our Menti on the screen. That QR code is still there if you need to scan.
All right, so we have a positive group here. People who love assessment. I love this. So we have 4 that are believers and assessment champions, up 4 that are, it generally works and it's well and beneficial. So this is great. This is amazing. Thank you.
You're making our work easy for us today. And it's okay if you're skeptical. We understand that sometimes assessment is tough to integrate into your daily workload, but we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. Let me just get back to presenter mode. Okay, so thanks again for indulging us in that poll. Before we get into some of the examples, I kind of wanted to bring it back to basics and talk about, why do we even do assessment in the first place? How did we kind of get here as a sector in our higher education, and go through some background on the topic. So some people kind of think assessment is like a newer fad or a trend in higher ed, but it's actually been around since the late 70s and 80s during a period of closer examination of our educational system. So it's been around for a while. Some of you might remember sort of the seminal report, A Nation at Risk from 1983, that kind of talked about some of the shortcomings of the US educational systems, some of the gaps we were seeing in achievement outcomes, and how that was making it harder for the US as a whole to position itself as a competitor in the global economy. So this sort of new emphasis on accountability in higher ed and excellence in education grew out of that movement and that report. So this also resulted in an increase in the emphasis on high quality teaching and learning practices, and a push to create a culture of evidence in higher ed. And this is something that educational researcher Kay Patricia Cross, who, if you're familiar with some of the assessment literature out there, she does the Cross Academy, the CAT techniques. She called it an opportunity to foster internal feedback loops for improvement. So even though this was sort of brought about through some external pressures, it's most beneficial if you use assessment for that internal improvement lens. So that's another thing that we wanted to touch on as well, that how we approach assessment is going to impact how valuable it is as a practice when you actually roll it out at the department, program, or course level. So there's sort of 2 main ways that you can approach assessment, and you'll probably notice the difference between the 2 right off the bat. The first one on the left-hand side, maybe it's a little overly prescriptive. Maybe it's really driven in a top-down manner and more owned by the administration, more compliance-centered, more driven by accreditation requirements, those external forces. And most importantly, it's more of an afterthought. It's more of a, just say that you did it. Just, give us that report, just write it down kind of thing. But that's really not going to work to your benefit. That's not going to be a valuable use of the assessment framework. What we're actually hoping that, how we approach this as a university is with a more flexible framework, with a faculty ownership approach, where we create, policies and practices through shared governance structures. So if you're familiar at all with, the work of our office, you might know that we have a faculty-led assessment council. We have a faculty-led Gen Ed advisory group. We're even launching a student assessment council to get more of the student voice involved in that process. And then most importantly, it should be driven by this real internal reflective interest in data-driven decision-making and continuous improvement. And ideally, it will be more embedded, more aligned. It won't feel like an added burden because it's going to become part and parcel of your day-to-day work. And you'll just be tracking those results over time to see where and how you can make improvements. And then one key thing I do want to highlight as well, sort of that, traditional approach doesn't always evolve with changes in the sector, in your discipline, in higher education, overall. We're trying really hard to be receptive to feedback. If you, engage with us, you'll know that we do a lot of feedback surveys. So you'll get a feedback survey after this workshop. Really engaging in that process of assessing the assessment to see if the framework is set up in a way that's going to make us have valuable results that are actionable.
All right, so if you're engaged and involved in the components mentioned on that previous slide, on the green side, the right-hand side of the previous slide, you're well on your way to not only developing, but sustaining a culture of assessment. So these are two quotes, you're going to see the other one pop up, that really solidify what we were talking about in that previous slide. So the first one is assessment is a chance for teachers to focus even more deeply on the discipline that they love. And then demonstrating student learning seems to be the Academy's best strategy for confronting criticisms and adapting constructively to change. So if you're working on these two things, you're constantly looking to see where you can make changes and improve, you are definitely solidifying that culture of assessment.
Okay, so where does the evidence that assessment works even come from? It comes from this field called the scholarship of teaching and learning. So if you're already involved in assessment, this may be something that you're familiar with. If not, SOTL, the abbreviation for it, is the process of using assessment results to inform the public, right? You're going to make that information public through publishing, through peer review, and then use those results to advance our collective understanding of effective pedagogy. So I really like this quote from one of the resources we used when creating this presentation. When we have better evidence, we can make better teaching decisions. So SOTL is really taking that assessment evidence and making it public for all to use to their advantage. And then assessment really is the ultimate form of evidence-based practice in and of itself. You can think of it, the assessment plan like a research plan for your own pedagogy. So we tried to set it up in kind of a parallel structure to maybe the scientific, method or research question approach. So your overall framing question would be, how well are students learning X? And then that hypothesis would be your program learning objective, that PLO. So students will be able to do blah, 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 skill, activity, competency by the time they finish my course or my program. Your independent variables, things like teaching methods, your instructional activities, your assignments and assessments. Your dependent variables obviously would be, how well students achieve that PLO. And then actually conducting your experiment, right? Teaching your lesson, administering your assignment, and then evaluating the data by collecting those artifacts, analyzing the results, and then using those results for teaching improvement. All right, so now that we've kind of covered the background of the basics, there's a couple examples of assessment tools, assessment best practices that were really prominent in the literature on why assessment can be a really valuable approach for both teachers and students. And the biggest one was the use of PLOs, or program learning objectives, could also be course learning objectives at the course level. And sort of continuing with that science experiment analogy, I found another quote from Richmond, another resource we used for this presentation. Good scientists commit themselves to a hypothesis before conducting an experiment so that they can clearly determine their success. And good teachers set learning objectives so that they can determine the success of their pedagogy. So PLOs as sort of this foundation of the assessment process actually do result in improved performance among students. So if you've completed our assessment reports or, again, engaged with our office, you'll know that step one for us is always, all right, tell us what students should be able to do by the time they complete your program. It's that sort of foundational understanding of backward design, beginning with the end in mind, right? One study that we found by Locke et al. From 1981, so a little bit older, but it was from the American Psychological Association, looked at different lab and field studies and found that 90% of those that had clear, specific, and challenging goals, so those kind of SMART objectives that we always push our faculty and staff toward, actually had higher student performance results than those that had easy, amorphous, or no goals at all. So why is this the case? Well, PLOs actually work to support student in their achievement by directing their attention. It helps to increase their persistence and their motivation. It supports them in strategy development. So maybe they realize, I don't really understand what that PLO means, or I'm really struggling to achieve that. And now I realize I need to follow up with my professor because I'm seeing this as a gap. And really improving that metacognitive skill set. So thinking about their thinking about how they're learning and improving over the course of their degree. Another reason why we found that PLOs are really effective in improving student learning outcomes is because it promotes equity. So direct instruction on what to learn by way of these learning objective statements gives students increased clarity, regardless of their background or how they've been prepared for college in the past. So this aligns with, sort of basic principles of inclusive pedagogy, and it helps students from all backgrounds understand, whether the purpose of the lecture in relation to the course, or the course in relation to the program, or the program in relation to their intended career. And most importantly, as faculty, we maybe forget that this is sometimes new to beginning students. We feel that, of course, this is self-explanatory. I don't need to say this out loud because we're experts, right? We're so used to the content and to the lessons that it just becomes second nature. But really spelling it out makes it explicit to all learners of all different types and helps promote learner agency. And then one other piece that assessment really helps with is fostering alignment across the breadth of your courses, your program, your curriculum. One thing that we hear a lot out, when we're at conferences is this concept of garbage in, garbage out, right? It's kind of a negative mindset, but we find that if you're not setting yourself up for success in your assessment plan, if you're not aligning things in a way that's going to make sense, then of course you're not going to collect meaningful data that's going to be actionable and guide you on a pathway to improvement. So it really all does stem from that initial PLO and how you align things, further from there. So of course, just promoting that alignment across pieces of the puzzle, and then even aligning between your learning objective to appropriate assessment methods. So making sure that if you've got a learning objective on, communication, you're not assessing that through a multiple choice survey, right? You're using an appropriate method that's going to actually measure the skill that was mentioned. And then further promoting alignment between those assessment methods and your evaluation methods. So the way that you're grading, scoring, or providing feedback to students. And the reason why this works is that it provides students with a more cohesive and transparent educational experience that actually helps improve their satisfaction with your courses and your program and help them be more engaged in their own learning. And the flip side of that is when students sense a lack of alignment between, whether that's learning objectives and methods or methods and evaluation processes, it can actually foster these feelings of unfair treatment. It can reduce their motivation and it can increase classroom dissent. And you might see that, as you have students approaching you to say, I don't understand why I got the grade that I did, or I don't understand why this was on the quiz when the lecture was about, XYZ other topic. So helping promote that alignment will really make things more accessible and transparent to students so that they can learn, we're sequential learners, right? And that will help them process the information and achieve better outcomes in the long run. I'm going to hand it off to Diana to talk about rubrics.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about this case study that was led by John Bean in 2011. And it's 53 teachers who each grade 300 essays. And the grades were assigned on a simple 9-point quality scale, which is really a Likert scale. 94% of the graded essays received 7 or more different ratings, which might be a bit of a shock here. And then 1/3 of the essays received all 9 scores. So you have a student who received both a 1 and a 9 on their essay. So you're probably wondering why. So why was there such a large discrepancy in the evaluation of this assessment? So these are some potential considerations. There were differences in disciplinary emphasis. So each of those teachers came from a different discipline, which means they're coming with a different lens on how they're going to grade a particular assignment. There was no clear indication of the difference between score levels. So there was nothing to indicate what's the difference between a 7 and an 8 or a 2 and a 3. There was no agreed upon language or definition of rubric components or expectations. And I think this is probably the most important part of this, is why there was such a discrepancy. There was no norming among the teachers for their inter-rater reliability. So there was no, like, let's just get 3 or 4 together, let's all grade them and let's agree. Like, let's, if we have differences, let's talk about why we're having differences. So let's think about some possible solutions so that this wouldn't happen again. To have descriptive analytical rubrics, it's an assessment best practice. Provide clear descriptions of each level. So really indicate if you're going from a 2 to a 3, a 4 to 5, a 7 to an 8, really indicate what that jump is and what it means. So it's very clear as to why a student received a 7 versus an 8. And then to always share the rubric with the students in advance. So it's really good to have them see it. You can dispel any misconceptions, clear up anything, and then that way everyone's on the same page when it comes to expectations for the assignment. So what does SOTL say about rubrics? They increase the quality of student work because now students know what they need to do to be able to get a certain score, reduces grading burden, makes grading more reliable, reduces disagreement. So once again, if it's clear, students will know why they got the 2 or 3, the 4 or 5. Clarifies assignments, course, and program expectations, and it promotes transparency, equity, learner agency, and student-centered approach. So students could then take that rubric, really dive deep into it, and then do their assignment so that they can do their best on that particular assessment.
And I just wanted to jump in to add, we're sort of walking through these takeaways rather quickly, and the full citations are available in our sources at the end of the presentation. So if you want to get a deeper look into any of these, takeaways, please do. And, we often hear that, rubrics can be a little controversial, right? They take a lot of time to develop and to develop a good one. Like Diana explained with that first example, a 9-point scale is a good first attempt at a rubric, but a descriptive analytic one that really susses out the differences between the levels and between the different components that you're evaluating are going to be a roadmap, not just for you as the instructor, but also for the student to take in as they're planning their assignment and learning activities. Okay, so we talked through a couple of best practices and examples that are backed up by the research, but these are some of our broad strokes that we wanted to reinforce. So institutional approach to assessment matters, right? You want to be more towards that green box that we showed that is faculty owned, that is student centered, and that is responsive to changes, right? Because if you're not incorporating those elements, your assessment process could get stale and it won't serve you anymore, and it won't be valuable to engage in. So it should leverage some of these best practices like learning objectives, like rubrics, like making sure things are aligned, and it should be a cyclical, ongoing process. Doing assessment as a one-off maybe gives you a little bit of insight, but doing assessment as a longitudinal study of your program, of your teaching, is going to give you more historical data and more actionable information over time. And then just the importance of communicating these things to students and how it can actually impact and improve their performance. So giving them the tools to be successful. They're not just tools that we collect on a report or that someone makes you write down in your syllabus. They're actually things that students can use and benefit from. And then last but not least, think about how you might contribute to the scholarship of teaching and learning. We know that faculty are constantly doing this sort of intuitively, but if you were to maybe take a snapshot and think about publishing in one of the assessment or research, educational research journals, it could be a really good way to share your insights with the broader community. And I know we're only got 30 minutes here today, but we wanted to ensure we had enough time for discussion so that we're not just talking at you, but that we also hear from you. So Diana, take it away.
You're right. We've been talking to you for 20 minutes. So now we would love to hear from you. So we want to know, have you had any assessment successes in your program? What evidence did you collect that led to improvement? Or what was the impact on student learning achievement? So what were some of the good things that came out of your assessment process?
Anyone want to be brave and unmute and share?
I'm happy to share some assessment successes I had in a previous role at a previous institution, because right now I'm kind of just getting into doing more assessment in my position as a residence hall director in campus residences. But at my previous institution, I used assessment to really look into our community engagement model for hosting programs for live-on residents and seeing what components of it were efficient and what components were potentially just like unnecessary work for student staff who are hosting programs and doing different engagement initiatives. So with that, I collected evidence from the resident assistants hosting the program. So I was doing like qualitative interviews with them to ask them about their experience of like what programs were the most successful, what ones did they have an easier time implementing, and then did more of like a quantitative Likert scale from the students attending programs to ask them about what programs did they go to the most, which ones did they like the most, how well were they learning the proposed domains that we wanted students to be learning from these programs, and then was able to use that to present to our department on what programs should we keep doing and what programs do we maybe need to look at a little bit more critically and think like, okay, on pen and paper, we might be saying that these are diversity programs, but students aren't actually getting diversity education out of these programs. So thinking more critically about how do we both change the model on the professional staff level, but then also how do we better train student staff to better implement those domains that we want to see in the programs.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. That was wonderful. Is there anyone else who'd like to share? When we learn best, we learn from each other.
If not, I'll jump in with just, some examples that Diana and I have encountered in working with programs, over the years. I know specifically one program that through their program assessment plan found that they actually needed to revise a prerequisite or incorporate a prerequisite before students got to a specific course, that they were struggling in this sort of mid career course, and they needed better reinforcement of some topics before they got to it so that they could be successful. Another one with a graduate program that I used to work with was assessing, what students thought they would need out in the field, what our alumni thought that was going to be necessary when they actually got to their career, which was in healthcare management. And it allowed us to open up a new elective in, topics like long-term care, other topics like physician practice management. So it was an opportunity to kind of expand the curriculum, be responsive to the demands of the industry, and also be responsive to students' identified needs.
Thank you. All right, so now we'll talk about, if you're a little skeptical, I don't know if this group is really in that category, but if you are skeptical about assessment, what might give you a pause, and how could Stony Brook adapt its approach or process to make assessment more valuable for you? Because, when we have, the templates and the different reports that we send out, we always want to make sure that it's meaningful for you. Like, we don't want you to feel like you're wasting your time. We want this to feel as though, wow, this gave me information that I can now make strategic plans going further. So we want to know what will make this more meaningful to you.
I know it's sort of like an existential question, and it's a Tuesday at 2 o'clock, so it might be tough to answer at the moment. But if anything comes to mind, if no one, wants to volunteer here, please, don't hesitate to reach out to us, set up a meeting with us, send us an email. We also have a survey going out this week to assessment coordinators. So if you're the identified coordinator for an academic program, as well as members to our assessment council, to give us feedback on how the process has been going, over the last 2 years or so since our office launched. So please use that as a space to give anonymous, constructive feedback if you'd like. All right, so I won't read through these references, obviously, but they are here if you wanted to check out any of those citations. The ones that I have in bold are the ones that we consulted primarily for this presentation. I personally got a lot out of the Barkley and Major and the Richmond selections. And then Linda Susky, of course, is, sort of like an assessment guru. So she's always a great resource. And if you have not signed up for the remaining workshops in our series, we have just one more topic left at the end of the month on including the student voice in assessment. So please feel free to join us for that one. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. And we are here if you have questions, if anyone wants to stay on to chat. But we'll let you go about your day. Thank you.